Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Nucleus Investment Insights. Today we're going to air out some of Australia's dirty laundry and do a deep dive into money laundering in Australia. Back in 2006, Australia agreed to implement Tranche 2 global money laundering laws, but they're still yet to be enacted. Subsequently, Australia is awash with dirty money. Today on the show, we have Nathan Lynch, who's a speaker, author, who specializes in financial crime intelligence, anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing, and has just released the book, The Lucky Laundry, How the Australian Economy Got Hooked on the World's Dirtiest Cash. So Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here. Thanks for having me in.
Excellent. It's great to have you here. Today, as always, I want to welcome the founder and chief investment officer at Nucleus Wealth, Damien Klassen.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, Damo, thanks for being here. And also want to welcome our chief economist, Leith Van Onselen. Leith's been writing on the subject for about a decade. So, it's going to be an interesting discussion. So, Leith, thanks for joining us as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Looking forward to this one.
Excellent, guys. And my name's Sam Kerr. I'm the senior financial advisor at Nucleus Wealth. We've just got to do a bit of quick housekeeping before we get started. So if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell below to be notified when we go live or have a new episode recorded. Alternatively, you can follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Our show's available on all the majors. And for those of you listening live, feel free to drop your questions in the YouTube live stream chat, and we'll do our best to answer them during the show. So now we've got that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, I'll hand it over to you, Leith, to get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I just want to give a really quick update on this issue. Basically, Australia agreed to implement the what called Tranche 2 global anti-money laundering laws for non-financial corporations in 2006. Now that includes your real estate gatekeepers like real estate agents, accountants, and lawyers. But after 14 years and after stakeholder consultations in 2008, 2010, 2012, 2014 and 2017, Australia is still yet to introduce these laws, and as which has its doors wide open to money laundering through particularly real estate and other non-financial means. And I put a quick table in here, Sam, if you can flick it across. It comes from Transparency International. It shows that basically Australia has virtually zero money laundering laws and real estate lawyers, accountants, notaries, and other non-financial activities, which is in stark contrast to most other nations, especially developed nations in the world. And the end result is basically billions of dollars are being money laundered through our homes. And just to give you a quick some quick context, when Australia agreed to implement these rules in 2006. I was working at the Australian Treasury. I was about my mid-20s. I had lots of hair. I wasn't married. 16 years later, I'm a middle-aged guy with no hair, 2 kids, teenagers, and I'm still waiting. We're still waiting for these laws to come in. And I'm hoping that the new government, the new Labor government, will finally have the balls to basically introduce these laws. Both Labor and Coalition have failed, and hopefully we can finally put an end to this farce once and for all. That's enough from me. I think we should now kick it across to the expert, Nathan Lynch, who's written this fantastic book, which goes into these issues. He's an expert. He's been dealing with these issues for decades. First question for you, Nathan. It's all right. How pervasive is money laundering into Australia's property market? Do we actually have a figure on it?
Yeah, thank you, Leith. And I should also point out that you're also an expert on this topic, and I love your material. You guys have been a voice in the wilderness on this issue and many others, so it's a real privilege to be here to talk about this with you guys today. The scale of the problem, clearly, because it's an illicit market, is incredibly difficult to quantify. The whole modus operandi of money laundering, of course, is to conceal, to hide, to wash, so that no one can really determine the source of those funds. So putting a scale, a dollar figure on it is very difficult. At the recent Senate inquiry into the effectiveness of the AML regime, Austrac did come out and say that it's a big challenge, it's a big issue, and it's happening, which was good because quite often government agencies are very conservative and won't make that step to say that. So we've got all of our major agencies. The AFP pointed it out as a massive issue. What we know, for instance, is that for $1 million that's washed in Australia through a syndicate that's using a range of measures, more than half of that money is moving through property. So when the AFP has done some of its raids and broken open syndicates, for every $1 million, something like 575,000 is in property. The rest will be in other things like wine and jewellery and vehicles and high value goods. So if you think about the scale of the criminal economy, internationally, it's $2 trillion plus US per year. In Australia, the figures, range from 36 billion per year to 3 times that. And we can safely say from the bust that we've seen that at least half of that money is flowing into real property, commercial and residential.
So
Cool.
it puts us somewhere between 15 and 50, I guess, billion.
Yes.
And sorry, that's per annum, is it?
Per annum, yeah.
Annum.
And of course that money is compounding. Yeah. So we even saw with the recent Pandora Papers that there were some properties in Australia that popped up, owned by some interesting characters, and in that case there we were talking about huge commercial properties, hotels, things like that. So it's big money, and it gets reinvested and cleaned, and then it begets more money because these have been historically great investments.
Nathan, in your dealings, are you?
That's like the blank Scrabble piece. I just get to answer whatever I want, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, mate.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you obviously deal with a whole bunch of international experts on this. In your book, you mentioned Bill the Canadian, the former Mountie, I think he is. He's a bit of a legend. Do they all look at Australia sort of laughing at us and thinking we're a complete joke in this, or like are we an international pariah? And is there a lot of pressure on us to internationally to follow suit?
That's the conundrum with Australia. And that gets back to that issue of just how big the property industrial complex is in this country and how heavily it's captured government, because we've got probably the best financial intelligence unit in the world in Austrac. It's followed and admired internationally. I mean, some of the things that they've done with building the Fintel Alliance, where they actually bring bankers inside the agency and swear them in as public servants, and they have the confidentiality obligations that come with that. So they're doing amazing things. As we saw, they did the big ticket litigation cases that had way more impact than anything that came out of the Royal Commission, for instance. So we've got this killer agency that's just kicking massive goals with 300 odd staff. But then we've got these laws that, you're a pugilist, Leith, so you would know the analogy. We are literally getting them in the ring with one arm tied behind their back because they've only got half the tools that they need. So when people like Bill, all these same dynamics, of course, are playing out in markets like Canada. Do you
want to give a bit of background to Bill? That's probably because you obviously do a lot of description in the book. It's probably worth
Well, Bill's one of these guys who he's a Canadian. He was a Mountie. He was actually a financial guy. A lot of these people that end up in the AML world on the policing side, they've got a financial background. It might have been stockbroking or Eurobond trading or something like that. So that was Bill's background, but he always wanted to be in policing. And when he went to apply for the police, they sort of segued him off into a separate channel, which was the undercover program. And so Bill basically finds himself, I run through a scenario in the book where he's literally gone from, a year earlier, he's a hot shot trading on the floors in London. And then there he is, he finds himself in this flash of realization. He's inside a toilet cubicle having to pretend to shoot up smack with a junkie who he's just bought drugs off in his first ever undercover operation. And, they don't train them for every scenario, but they train them really well. So in that moment, Bill has to use all of his resources to get out of that situation. There's bikies outside that are going to beat the crap out of him if he's a narc. And he plays it cool, deals with it, and walks out of that toilet. But the interesting thing is when he walks out of there, he's got the evidence in his pocket, and the rush that he got in that moment, ironically, became his own drug. And so Bill's a character we follow through the book who he gets addicted to information. He gets addicted to the hunt for dirty money, and he goes way deep inside it, including to the, the relationship between China and Australia. So yeah, those cases like that are pretty fascinating. And Australia on the global stage, in the eyes of Canadians like Bill, is we're a conundrum because we're so good in certain areas, and we've done big litigation against the banks. We've changed conduct in the banking space remarkably, and then we've got this political problem that means our entire property sector in particular, because you've got lawyers, accountants, and real estate agents advising on those deals. It's a black spot, and the rest of the world just can't fathom what we're doing.
Quick Dorothy Dixer for you. I mean, I know the answer to this, you know the answer to it, but why hasn't Australia implemented these Tranche 2 rules?
Yeah. I reckon your readers probably know the answer too. I mean, when you're researching a book like this and you start off looking at an isolated issue of these anti-money laundering laws, but then in the process of doing that, you discover actually it's a microcosm into the level of capture. Because why would a country, I mean, it's understandable why, for instance, you might let property prices run loose through lax prudential regulation or low interest rates, for instance, not doing macro-prudential. But when you look at money laundering, that's a national security issue. Why would a country allow organised crime to flourish and have a free reign? So when you look at the lobbying and the power of that lobbying and the political capture, and just, let's hold the mirror up as well, because remember in 2019, Labor took reform on neg gearing, they took reform on franking credits, they took reform on ICAC, and money laundering was something that Chris Bowen committed to, and then they didn't get in, and they had touched the sacred cow of housing and asset prices and superannuation. So, it's not just politicians, it's us as voters, it's us as the public who aren't willing to take a little bit of hard medicine to have a clean economy and a society that we can really be proud of.
And I mentioned earlier that they've gone through five sets of industry consultation in that 16 years, and every time it's been, and I remember following the last one. It always got down to regulatory burden. Cost of doing business is going to go up, and then it just gets pushed away, and then everyone forgets about it. A couple of years later, you have another. It's a bit like the housing affordability inquiries. You have one every couple of years. They do the recommendations, nothing happens. You have another one. Yeah. It just seems to be this revolving circus that now, I'm middle aged, was a young dude when it started. You were the same, and who knows? It could be, grandparents. Before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, will our children be adults before AML passes? Possibly. It's getting that way, Does it take longer to pass legislation than it does to raise a child in Australia? So, you compare that with New Zealand. Remember when they got busted in the Panama Papers through their foreign trust regime and all of their involvement was exposed? They wrapped the whole thing up.
Do you want to just take one step back? So do you want to explain the Panama Papers and what happened there?
Yeah. So when the Panama Papers came out, that was the first one of these big, globally coordinated links from the ICIJ, and New Zealand was pretty popular in that. Just to add to the context, I guess the Panama Papers was a trove of documents through some accountants who had basically been hacked. With all the details of their clients and how they were hiding the money in Panama and other places. Yeah, exactly. Mossack Fonseca was the law firm and accounting firm, and they would set up all the elaborate company structures, and they would even offer, people with a passport who, if you really required secrecy, you could come to Mossack Fonseca, and one of the founders' fathers would stand in as a nominee director on your shady company. So they were a really customer-focused organisation, full service. And New Zealand, to its horror, being a country that brands itself 100% pure, the cleanest country on earth, environmentally and politically and everything, finds itself with this terrible foreign trust regime. And their people, their equivalent of Austrac, had done the review on foreign trusts, and it was only bringing in the manage, because the money, people don't often realize the money doesn't move. When you set these structures up, it's just the ownership. It's just a shell game, and the shell sits in New Zealand, but the assets are somewhere else. So what was New Zealand getting? They worked out it was something like $35 million a year in management fees, and the costs associated with it were huge. So they literally just cleaned the whole thing up, they did a thing called the Shewan inquiry. They cleaned up foreign trusts. They brought in their first phase of their money laundering regime, which is equivalent to our Tranche 1, with banking, casinos, bullion. And then 2 years later, they had the whole thing done, stitched up, passed, and within 4 years it was in effect. Meanwhile, we're still sitting here saying, can our economy bear the weight of a money laundering regime in housing, and do we need to have another inquiry?
That's interesting, because I'd almost argue that New Zealand's even more property obsessed than us. I mean, marginally, but look at the housing market and the size of a compared to their economy, it actually dwarfs ours. So the fact they got it through, I don't know if it's because they're got a better system of government. It's not there's two levels, proportional representation, all that sort of stuff.
One of the factors may have been that it was alleged that John Keys, the Prime Minister, was also named in the Panama Papers, so that may have played a part.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very quickly dealt with in New Zealand, and that was never properly explored. But it was one of the allegations that was there, that he was using offshore vehicles. But of course, so was Turnbull. There's nothing wrong with an offshore vehicle. There's nothing wrong with an offshore account. They can be perfectly legitimate structures. It's the abuse of them that is what people in this financial crime space are harping on about.
So we've obviously got a new government here. We know Labor took pledged to implement the rules in 2019. We know the Greens are all for it. With Peter Whish-Wilson, has been. I don't know, is he still in the Greens? But he is. So Peter Whish-Wilson was pushing pretty hard on this a couple of years back. So we know, Labor's got a stomping majority. They've got the Greens in their pocket on it. I can't imagine any of the Teals would be against it.
Well, part of their platform was ICAC and transparency.
Yeah. So it seems like a fait accompli, politically at least. Obviously, you're going to have the vested interest pushback, but like you always do, the property lobby and all that sort of stuff. So do you think now's our time? You might actually get it.
Yeah, I do. I think it'll happen in this term, and it has to happen. So the international pressure. Can you believe this? This is just mind blowing. The Fat F was coming to Australia in 2020, early. And
sorry, the Fat F is
acronym SEEP, Financial Action Task Force.
Yeah, it's part of the OECD.
Yeah, and it's a multilateral quango basically. No one really runs it. It's collectively
it's a global regulator.
Good. Yeah. Not a regulator. It doesn't have any powers. No, it's a standard.
I've got to stop calling them that, because I always say global regulator in my articles, so I better stop.
Yeah, they're like Interpol. They have no power other than the power of bringing people together and making sure, of course, with dirty money and tax evasion and all of these issues, you've got to work in lockstep, because if similar to the carbon debate, if one country moves ahead, then they're going to suffer as long as there's a loophole and a lower regulatory bar. In the world of money laundering, it's even worse. That money is so fluid, it's so dynamic, it's so adept at finding just the smallest crack in a damn wall. So, the Financial Action Task Force was coming here because we were one of the first countries to get the fourth round mutual evaluation, which looked at effectiveness. And, like I said earlier, we got massive bouquets for the work that Austrac was doing, and, incredible stuff. And then of course, we then had these huge glaring loopholes. We built half of a damn wall basically, and we're wondering why the water's flowing around it. And so they were coming back. We were one of the first countries to get this follow-up where we've got to say, what have you done in the last 2 years? And the visit got cancelled.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. It was incredible. They said they weren't coming down. This was pre-COVID. So they came up with an excuse as to why they weren't coming down. They sort of suspended the program. But since then, other countries have had follow-ups and we haven't. So something's going on there. We do now have Matthias Cormann as head of the OECD. Maybe that helps Australia's case. Not suggesting anything untoward, but just maybe that's a benefit to us when we need to speak in someone's ear. But that is not going to be sustainable. We're now down, languishing at the bottom of the list of recalcitrants with the financial epicenters of Haiti and Madagascar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because how many countries are with us? There's only 3 left, is it?
Well, there's 5. There's 5.
Okay.
We like to say that line because it's funny and it's true. But the reality is there's China and America, the elephants in the room. Okay, so they're very adept. The big superpowers are very adept at telling everyone else to clean up and then lagging themselves. But the difference is they actually have committed to it, and China's doing good work. Because Xi Jinping is very much anti-corruption. Yeah. So they've done good work in this area. They can't have, countries know that you can't have the golden calf of money laundering just coming into property and propping up your economy. It's going to infect other areas as well. As soon as you're turning a blind eye, you're going to get the rot of corruption. And, our banks saw that when like Westpac was turning a blind eye to multinational tax evasion. Lo and behold, it was also facilitating the child sex trade. So once you ignore all of this stuff, and you don't know what's going on inside your institution or your nation, anything could be going on. So that's sort of that's the American issue, is that they have actually committed to it and they're moving towards it. China's moving towards it from a lower base pretty rapidly and definitely. Well, and then you've got Australia, which is still just sitting there going, we might have a review.
Yeah. So I mean, some of that stories from your book about the whole the Chinese they call it the bounty hunters, and I think that's probably well worth relating back to the viewers.
Yeah, sure. So how incredible that this relationship between the Ministry of Public Security in China and the AFP in Australia, which are the 2 agencies dealing with this issue, and you can imagine it's a 2-way street, right? Because precursor chemicals and pseudoephedrine and things like that are coming down from China. So Australia needs support from their policing agencies. And then they're in turn saying, well, our kleptocrats are disappearing with loads of money, and Ponzi schemes and massive property investment frauds are happening. And it's finding a safe haven in Australia. So they need to work together and they need to support each other. But effectively, you have these complex areas where the relationship, even when both parties are committed to it, there's a mismatch. So one of those, for instance, is that in China, you couldn't charge someone with corruption in absentia. So once a kleptocrat got out to Australia, they're never going to get extradited because the death penalty is associated with corruption in China. They're kind of safe in Australia. And until China charges and convicts them, or at least charges them, the AFP is not going to go after their assets. That's exposing the Australian authorities. So you have this situation where the 2 minds just didn't quite meet for these reasons. And so in their creativity and pragmaticism, the Chinese sent down bounty hunters who would say, right, we'll get you $1 billion back and we'll take a percentage if we get it home. And so those people, Bill was doing some of that work. It's legal work. It's called civil asset recovery. And Bill and others, Bill was one of the legitimate ones who was trying to find assets and get them back legitimately. But there were other stories I heard about where they were literally putting massive pressure on families back in China, locking people up, things like that. And the kleptocrats here were getting like Chinese spies coming and harassing them, and knocks on the door in the middle of the night sort of stuff. So there was a whole spectrum in that world of asset recovery. There's a whole spectrum of people that participate in it, from the legitimate to the very scary.
Mm. So FATF, do you think they'll come in the next year or so? Like, because I assume once they come, they do their mutual valuation, the next one, and they finally, if the federal government won't want to be embarrassed again and get another bad report like they did last time. So that sort of might put a use by date on when we'll finally get these rules put in? Do you think maybe next year they might? Or is just, who knows?
I believe they were given an opportunity to clean it up. I believe the visit was put off because it was going to embarrass everyone, right? Yeah. And also Australia is a major player in this world of AML. You know, it's punching above its weight class. So, you know, it's really frustrating for people within these agencies as well, because they can't discuss policy. They can't influence government policy. They've just got to take what they're given. And so I think a decision was made that it's going to be best for everyone if Australia gets a little bit more time and this gets resolved. And then when we do our follow-up visit, we can report some good news and some progress. Well, as we know, 3 years passed and nothing happened. So Australia is literally now at the point where it's not just embarrassing ourselves. We're going to be facing additional costs. So in Europe, for instance, you know, this happened to New Zealand. The cost of them getting caught up in the Panama Papers was that suddenly, if you're in the EU doing business with a New Zealand company or a New Zealand financial institution, you'd need to be doing what we call enhanced due diligence. And that adds massively to cost and the time of doing business. So you're going to do it somewhere easier, right? If New Zealand has a red flag on it because it's a recalcitrant nation and it's higher risk, is that where you want to trade? Is that where you want to do business? So it was a real world cost to New Zealand. And so Australia now is really at the point where, you know, at the meeting that they're having in Berlin this week, you know, they're talking about the grey list, which is where you get put on a recalcitrants list. And we won't be grey listed, but, you know, countries like Turkey have been, Iceland has been. So there is nothing to say that, I mean, Pakistan and non-OECD members get hammered by this grey list, but so do OECD members occasionally. And, you know, I mean, we are in line for that. We deserve it. I think the change in politics will be such that the people in Canberra now know that this is just way beyond needing to be done.
Have you had many, I mean, obviously don't name names, but have you had many meetings with politicians from either side on this issue? And what's the general mood? Are a majority of them for it, or and they're just towing party lines, or is a big, you know, pushback?
I think there's a big group of people in politics who are just happy to, you know, I mean, look at the register of interests, you know. The old nag of self-interest is always worth backing because, you know, as Jack Lang said, you know, it's trying. So, you know, they've all got property portfolios, you know, multiples in some cases of investment properties. And, you know, people, a lot of politicians are just willing to not care. But then you've got amazing politicians. So, yeah, Peter Whish-Wilson was a great one. You know, it's people with that little bit of understanding. He came from an investment banking background, and he knows that a clean economy is a strong economy. This is the sheer stupidity. You clean up. 98% of the money in the world is clean money. You know, someone from one of the financial intelligence units said this to me. They were having similar discussions in their country, and they were saying to the politicians, look, 98% of the world's wealth is clean. That's the money we want to attract. The other 2% isn't worth having. And, you know, that's sort of where Peter Whish-Wilson comes from. He's an investment banker. He understands economics. He knows that the costs of doing this have been massively overplayed by the interested lobbies. And they've said, you know, the Pollyanna, the Chicken Little, the sky's going to fall, the Cassandra, but it's not. You know, New Zealand's still operating. So you end up with a better economy, a cleaner economy, a wealthier economy, when you have one that runs with integrity. We're now in that strange area where we're sort of like, can we really say that Australia is the clean, integrity-based country that it believed it was 20 years ago? I'm not sure we can.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we've spoke about this just prior to the election, and about saying, you know, the biggest, because there really wasn't a lot of policy difference between the two parties in terms of a lot of things, but saying, you know, that drop in transparency index doesn't actually matter until one day it does. And it's like that bit where, you know, it's your reputation. It's like, yeah, reputation's still fine because people still remember Australia from 10 years ago. And then it's like, as you've slowly dripped down, it's like, you know, if you make the mistake of pushing it too far, then all of a sudden you're branded as, oh no, that corrupt country, Australia. And, you know, you've got another 10, 15 years of trying to get your reputation back by,
Yep. It's very hard to win that back once you lose that ground. It's like, the old saying that it takes a lifetime to develop a reputation and a day to destroy it. Australia is facing that day. I mean, even one of my chapters is called The Caymans of the South Pacific, because that's what the people in Papua New Guinea call us. The anti-corruption campaigners in Papua New Guinea call us that because we're preaching to them about integrity and governance and all of those issues. And then all the money's flowing in the back door from corrupt deals in PNG and getting washed through realty in far north Queensland. So, we are really, I mean, we're not there. We've got time to fix this up, thankfully. We haven't got time. We've still got an opportunity to get things back on track. We just have to be in that situation where, in terms of there's people like Deb O'Neill in Labor, who is amazing. She did the inquiry into audit. She did the inquiry into the effectiveness of AML. So she gets it. The Greens get it. Nick McKim in the Greens has really picked the issue up. So, the people are out there, but the lobbying forces just have to be ignored because their voice is not the voice of broader Australia. Yeah.
And that's always the way we see it across everything, don't we? Energy and, properties particularly. They're very powerful.
Gas is a good one. You guys have been warning for 8 years about the gas issue, and people ignored it, and look where we are now. So we have to, all of these corruption and policy failures always come back to lobbying and political donations. It's
and there's sort of, I guess the line on that one though as well is that the voices that seem to be listening to at the moment on the gas debate are a lot of the people who got us there in the first place, in terms of because they're the big players in the industry. And I do poles and wires, and so when you ask me what the solution is, it's more poles and wires. And I do gas, and so when you ask me what the problem is, we need more gas, and we're not getting enough of it. And so I guess what I'm coming back to is, in the AML world, is there so I guess, is there anything in the tranche 2 that you think might be sort of where are the lobbyists going to push? If they can either push to get the whole thing put off and we need more reviews, but if there's no chance of it, is there any way they can try and water things down to the stage where where are the weak points, to sort of show us that yes, we've made a notional stamp, but we're just trying to paper over the cracks.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. You've got, the lobby that probably would surprise you is the legal lobby. That is so powerful, and most of the people in politics have got a law a lot of them have got a law background. They're well connected to the law societies. So the Law Council has been stridently opposed to this. It's incredible. So the Law Council gets up there and just says, instead of being clever about it and going, what you said, let's carve out litigation, which is what they did in New Zealand. So you can launder money now through sham litigation and no one has to see anything, right? So instead of being pragmatic and going, we've agreed to this, this is an international commitment, it's happening, let's get a favorable outcome for our members. They're stuck in the dark ages, and they literally sit there and say, I love the Law Council, but I think they're wrong on this issue, because they sit there and say that it is inconsistent with issues such as privacy and confidentiality and client privilege. Well, hang on a minute. The UK passed this 15 years ago. Don't we have a UK common law system?
Yeah.
It's just so absurd. And that's sort of what you're up against. But, to their credit, they're doing explicit lobbying, and they publicly say this is our position. It's that covert lobbying that you get more so in powerful industries, where they'll say something publicly and then in the backroom corridors of Canberra, they do the exact opposite. So, certainly when you're looking at a economically powerful industry like property, I suspect there's a bit of that going on.
So, and actually, along that same note, one of the things that surprised me in your book, you spoke a little bit about the some of the property deals that sort of had come from China, in terms of China telling us there were problems with it. Maybe you could sort of use that as an example of how we're absolutely looking the other way and is not even looking for the problems and relying on other countries to come to us and tell us, you've got money laundering going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty ironic and concerning, isn't it, when China comes and lectures us on integrity in anti-corruption and turning a blind eye to these things. So certainly they have a speck in their own eye as well that they're needing to deal with, but they are progressing. That's the difference. They're progressing and making really strong moves. But when government officials come down to Australia and have $500 million of assets here, something is deeply wrong. And when they're buying,
and this is the government officials who are earning, I think you said $33,000 a year.
Yeah, hardly any.
Excellent savers.
And that frugality is to be commended. I'm not knocking that. But the fact that I think there's just something fundamentally odious about the idea that our children would be having to go and bid at auction against a organized crime gang or someone who's just getting money outside of China to get around capital controls. But to do so, they've fallen in the arms of organized crime who can give them that money, which lo and behold turns out to be the proceeds of a drug sale.
Yeah. Okay. So let's give this, I guess, example of, I've got my drug money here and I'm busy trying to get it into Australian property. How do I go about it? How hard is it? Give us the steps.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to give you a how-to guide. we always have a few of those dialing into our corporate webinars, let me assure you. But what I will say is, I mean, at the bigger picture, you've got this symbiotic relationship that is so damaging between the capital controls in China and Vietnam and places like that. So you get legitimate people with legit money that have to go into this black market. And so they're then moving into the hands of hualadars, like these, effectively, I call them financial dating agencies that just marry up customers. So you've got money in Australia, you've got dong in Vietnam, and you both want to have your assets in the other country, we'll just pair you up. And so the money doesn't move, it just goes from one account to another account in the home country. So that hawala style of operating means that if you're in, say, China, and you've got this huge demand for safe haven assets outside the country, legitimately or illegitimately, but let's work with legitimate funds, those people are going to any measure, gaming in Macau and then moving it down, or setting up back-to-back loans out of Hong Kong, but also just going to an underground banker who gives you $1 million in Australia to go and buy a house. So they're the cash buyers we hear about. Oh, these cash buyers coming down, with suitcases full of money. No, that's the proceeds of a drug sale on the streets of Sydney or Melbourne that then is being put in a bank account, in a real estate agent's trust account or a lawyer's trust account or whatever it is that isn't monitored for the reasons we've discussed. And then it is that drug money that buys that property. And then there's probably a corresponding loan back in China to the underground loan sharking guys. So you can see the dynamic where you've got these capital controls. It's partly why the Canadas and Australias and New Zealands and the UKs have just been so hammered by this problem of hot money.
Yeah, and your real estate agents basically, here's a whatever $25,000, $30,000 commission. Would you like to look the other way? Yeah.
They don't even need to look the other way because they're not required to look anywhere.
Yeah.
They literally just can say, I don't know anything about dirty money. I'm not educated. I'm not skilled up in that. That's not my responsibility. We've even seen it with FIRB. I mean, that's a fascinating one because real estate agents are kind of captured to an extent through FIRB and the FATA legislation on foreign transactions. So, they do have some obligations there, and we know that they're not being exercised properly. And FIRB just hasn't been powerful and committed enough to actually get some scalps.
Well, and actually, that's one thing leads exactly where I was going to ask. I think Joe Hockey when he was treasurer, had this whole thing about there's going to be a crackdown. I think there was a couple of high-profile houses in Sydney that got sold and all that type of stuff. And then the second he walked out the door, it seemed as if it just disappeared.
Mate,
Well,
Leith. That's all right. I'll tell you. So when you look at that FIRB data every year and you actually look at how many people have been prosecuted, I think the average fine. So you got basically a 1 in 1,000 chance of probably getting busted for doing the wrong thing. And then if you get busted, I think the average fine was like $5,000. So it's like a slither of stamp duty. So it's just it's not even worth worrying about.
Yeah, so the actual law that they're breaking in terms of that.
So if you buy an existing housing rather existing home rather than a new dwelling, stuff like that. But they're basically, there's no, there hasn't really been any penalty. At worst, you might have to sell your home for a profit when you've already made, 20, 30%, whatever it is. There's really no downside. And the ridiculous thing about it is when they bought that, those foreign buyer rules in, they shifted to the ATO, and I thought, oh, beauty, at the time, because I thought the ATO's got teeth. They know what they're doing. It's out of, because I used to work in Treasury and I used to deal with the guys who worked in the Foreign Investment Review Board. And I'm not throwing shade at those guys. There was like 8 people in there when I worked on the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement. It was a tiny little team. And it's like, how are they going to monitor, all these billions of dollars going into property and transactions and stuff, right? They're supposed to be there for big nationally significant deals. That's it.
Yeah.
So then when they shifted it to the ATO and they put a team of like 100 or so on, I thought, oh, here we go. This has actually got teeth. But every single report that's come out since, it's all been, it's basically a wet lettuce. I don't even know what all those people do, if they're still working on it or if they've just gradually on the down low wound it down to almost nothing. And they just pretty much just do reporting now. Is that your perception too, Nate?
Oh, look, I mean, there are powers that they've got. So if you're an advisor, a lawyer, a real estate agent or whatever on a deal, you're captured as a third party. So it's not just the purchaser who has the obligation, it's the advisors as well. And if you've fraudulently got around, come up with some scheme to conceal it, well, that's criminal. So they do have have powers.
Prosecuted anyone yet? I don't think anyone under third party. Yeah, I don't think any third party has been busted yet. The only penalties have been minor, tiny little fines on the people who've actually bought the homes and then, had to pay like $5,000 or something.
out of your 50 grand commission at minimum, on a standard home. So I mean, you're just paying the big guy his 10, right?
Yep.
The lack of enforcement there, in all policing and law enforcement matters, you just need big cases that scare everyone into compliance. That's the only thing that works. And I think it comes back to that whole issue of, really, we've had a policy in the last couple of years, as we all know, that's just been about keep the housing, but keep housing ticking over. It's the engine of the economy now. It stepped in when resources went a bit wobbly, and it is a policy that has just infused all layers of government, because that message has gone through that we don't want to kill the sacred cow.
Yeah, and so the question from an investment perspective is, this is one more thing to sort of send house prices down, and on top of rising interest rates. I guess the question is, if it comes close to the end of the term, the current 3-year term, then you're like, oh, okay, it's maybe it's by then that we've stopped raising interest rates, and maybe even cutting interest rates, and there's a bit of offset. Whereas, I guess if it comes out in the next 6 months, as the RBA is ratcheting rates quickly, it could be a further leg of downside for the Aussie property and I guess real estate agents and people like that. So I guess your thoughts on timing, if it gets through that, you sort of thought it would get through this time.
I think it's a shoe in this term of government for sure. I mean, it's entirely consistent with the Teal's philosophy around integrity and transparency. It's consistent with, obviously, the Greens are on side. I mean, its moment has come. But what they don't want to do is, through 16 years of inaction, have it. Look, it's not going to crash the property market. It's going to be a minor impact, really. But you don't want it to be another pro-cyclical factor. Like while you're ramping up interest rates and people are in stress and there's forced sales, and then you bring in an AML regime on top, you know, at the worst possible time. But look, politically, and this runs across both major parties, seven different prime ministers have kicked this issue down the road, despite their promises that they'll follow through on a bipartisan issue, right? So this is not a Labor or Liberal issue, but unfortunately now when they're going to be
both of them,
it is a Labor and Liberal issue, exactly. Yeah. So you know, I think that's the only thing, Damien, is I just hope that they don't wait all this time and then it becomes just part of the cataclysm that Australian property is due for, you know, in terms of 20% declines, we're now being told.
And then you got to roll off those laws. Oh, those AML laws. We're going to roll them back.
Or, you know, look what they did. You know, it wasn't the RBA and it wasn't APRA that failed over 20 years. It was the bloody money laundering laws.
Yeah, exactly. Let's roll them. Let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I guess so. From what you're saying, and it always scares me when I hear you say, "Oh, it's very logical, I'll do it." Because I feel a backlash of like, there's all these logical reasons, but then you get the vested interest. But I suppose what you're saying is it doesn't look like it's coming in the next, say, 9 months. Then 9 to 12 months. It's probably
no. It's you know, it'll still have to go through all of that.
A sixth round of consultation.
Yeah. And you know, it'll be I would think, you know, probably a 2-year process. I mean, look, you could bring it in. There's a table in the Act called the item 51, designated business activities, and basically you can update that table, you know, really quickly. So it's not complex. It's very easy to do, but that cost benefit analysis and all of that stuff, and
and giving though, and you know, reasonably though as well. You know, if you did it tomorrow and said, yeah, okay, it's in the next day, you know, there's a lot of real estate agents who won't have a clue what's going on and would therefore be committing crimes. You sort of do need to say, okay, we need to at least enough time to let them know and have time to do training and work out. You know, okay, a sack full of cash, you know, you're no longer allowed to accept that as, you know, you actually need to work out where it's come from.
Yeah. There's a lot of, that's the thing, is you've got in this, so in the first half of the AML regime, it's about 15,000 businesses, and they're big, sophisticated businesses, in most cases, financial services. You know, they're used to dealing in a highly regulated operating environment, so they can handle this, and they do a good job. Like when they're, you know, the thing about the AML regime is there's a section in the Act, which is section 123, tipping off. So if you say anything about a report that you've submitted, it's a criminal offence for the person who submitted the report and revealed it. The idea is that you can't tell your dodgy client. But what it has created is an environment where organisations like ANZ is brilliant at AML, and it hasn't had any skirmishes with Austrac. And it's done a great job by its board and shareholders for that reason. And they haven't suffered the disruptions that the other banks have had, including NAB, that fortunately got an enforceable undertaking instead of litigation. But there are pockets of absolute excellence, and they can never be told to the public. So, you know, there's that side of it. But unfortunately, when you move to this second tranche, there's going to be about 100,000 businesses, and they'll be, you know, little accounting firms, there'll be real estate agents with a couple of people. And that raises the next question of, you know, you've got to make sure if you bring it in that it's not just window dressing, that these people are actually capable of knowing what the risks are and you know, how to spot it.
But also that they'll enforce it. As we said, we spoke about the FORB things, but if you put 3 people and a dog in the enforcement team and say, go to it, guys, you know, but this is from your understanding, this is all going to fall under Austrac anyway, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Austrac is a fearsome enforcement agency. You know, like they have a tiny team and they smashed CBA into submission. You know, I mean, normally, if you look at bank bill swap rate rigging, you know, how incredible is that? In the Northern Hemisphere, you had billion-dollar penalties for LIBOR rigging. And down here, you had the BBSW case, and they settled them with like $20 million penalties. And Westpac went and fought it in court and got a $3.3 million fine. So this is ASIC, your big dog regulator, attack dog, getting not even a library late fee against Westpac for attempting but failing to rig the benchmark. I mean, come on, guys, if you're going to attempt to rig it, at least do it. That's just incompetence. So, you've got that arrangement there where they just didn't care about getting busted because it was just a cost of doing business. And then Austrac came along and it's a totally different creature. It is handing out, for better or worse, these billion-dollar penalties. It's massively tapped into home affairs agencies. So you're not dealing with wet lettuce leaves at your normal, APRAs and ASICs. You're actually dealing with, right, you facilitated the meth trade, human trafficking, whatever it is. You're now dealing with home affairs. So no, the regulator will be equipped, and the regulator will be a fearsome creature. The question is, can small businesses, that's, I guess that's the next, we're not even at that hurdle yet, but that would be the next thing for the industry, is to turn around and go, right, we've now got these laws through. It's incumbent upon us in the financial crime world to make sure that it's not just a boondoggle. But that's the nature of the profession. The people that work in this space are brilliant and committed, and they will do a really good job. I can promise you that.
Can I ask? Are the banks annoyed that these non-financial corporations aren't required to do these rules, or do they just don't care? They worry about their own backyard.
They are livid. Okay,
yeah, I imagine they would be. It's sort of unfair.
Well, what about this, right? So you sit there and you find CBA 700 million, and then you find Westpac 1.3 billion, right? And then you demand a board refresh and governance reviews and all this sort of stuff, and you've got politicians up there in the media saying it's disgraceful. Well, why don't we judge Canberra by the same standard that we judge our bankers? It would be woeful. And do you reckon they're not annoyed by that? It's shocking. Let's, if you guys care so much, show us this legislation that, sat on your desk for 3 years or 15 years. So that is, there's a huge amount of annoyance and anger, but also they're throwing massive amounts of money at it. But so imagine you're a bank, right? You're running sophisticated transaction monitoring. You're using AI. You're doing all this really cool stuff. You're part of the Fintel Alliance. You're at the cutting edge of this space. And then you have a trust account that you cannot see what's coming in and out of that. So this idea that, don't worry, we don't need it in lawyers and accountants because the banks are monitoring those accounts. To them, it's just a pooled account. They don't know what came in and out. So that's an enormous frustration to the banks, is to be saying to them, we're going to smash you if you don't comply and don't do a good job. We want you to spend loads of money, but then we're going to do nothing about supporting you with proper legislation. And that is that's shocking. It's appalling.
Yeah. The other thing that I sort of did get out of your book, and I don't know if I've read this the right way, on the Austrac side, was that it sounds like it was a little bit they didn't realize the consequences of the legislation, if you know what I mean, like in terms of its if we've got some other regulators that seem to be well captured, and then all of a sudden we've got this regulator that unfortunately wrote them some rules that actually seem like they can enforce them and actually make dangerous penalties. So I guess that's the first question. Have I read that right? And then I have a follow-on question. Yep. So that's a yes for information? Because the next question is, at what danger do you think there is that now that that's been made aware of, that you're like, oh, we're doing this tranche 2. How about we fix some of the problems, how about we neuter and sort of just, lop a few tools out of the Austrac thing that the banks are obviously not that fond of.
You're an astute reader. That is, it's the American model of enforcement, which is you've just got to carry a massive stick, and that, because otherwise you get dragged through the courts for 5-10 years, and then like the Westpac case we spoke about. What is the point of any of that, right? What you want is a quick outcome, you want a significant outcome, but most of all, you want an outcome that changes behaviour, and that's the yardstick.
That was the other one we had. yeah, but that was the other one we had when we had the talking about the Royal Commission stuff. Was that the guy we had on who'd written a similar book was basically saying, yeah, but Westpac just goes, no, we're gonna fight everything in court. The other ones might go, yeah, okay, let's just cop it, we did it. Here's a fine. Whereas Westpac's like, nope, bring it on.
We're bring it on. We love a fight, and they've got the best lawyers and armies of silks. But isn't it interesting that they were fighting Austrac, right? They were going head to head with Austrac. They were ready to litigate. And it was going to be interesting because these laws have never been tested in court. It's always settled. And, in the end, they had a change of management. And that's another factor because if you keep the same management in place, they're going to spend shareholders' money to cover their misdeeds. And they will settle before it gets raked over in court. So with the Westpac one, you had whole new leadership team. You had McFarlane coming in and ready to battle. You had good lawyers going, this law's got a few loopholes that we can play here. And in the end, I believe a big part of these litigation issues is reputational. So basically, when the extent of their facilitation of the child pay-per-view sex trade became apparent, no one was willing to fight that in court. And that was a big part of it. So they might have been the bulk of their offences were around, like basically swift avoidance.
Yeah, but as you said, like I said, it's that sad thing that it's if it was just all this drug money and with all this stuff we don't know where it's come from, and maybe it's legal, maybe it's not, and it's Chinese kleptocrats transferring money, and that's fine. We'll fight that. It's sort of like we got lucky that the fact that they got child pornography popped up, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, okay, we can't fight. That might have been the smallest part of their wrongs, but at least it was included. So they were like, okay, we can't fight it. Whereas if it wasn't, it sounds as if they were just like, oh well, kleptocrats, that's fine. Spiriting money out of Russia or China or wherever, we can PNG, we can do that. We just want
But yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a pragmatic aspect of you've got to sell what you're doing to your political masters. So, there's that as well. I mean, if Westpac didn't have that element, because you saw in all the media around it, right? It was all led by the child exploitation issue. But the real, obviously that's a horrific state of affairs, but the vast majority of the offences were in the swift avoidance. And that's where you're talking about huge global multinational companies being able to get an Australian BSB number that's linked to their account in Singapore. So when you pay these big corporates, you think you're paying into a Westpac branch because you're given a BSB. Well, they were effectively leasing BSBs. That meant the money just disappeared into Singapore or another jurisdiction. Yeah. The ATO will never unwind that. We'll never know how many tens of billions were stolen from Australian taxpayers through Australasian cash management and their swift avoidance infrastructure. But yeah, like answering your question, Damien, the US model where they do big fines and get big outcomes, that's really important. And so Austrac has been able to go into these battles and scare people into a negotiation because the consequences of getting it wrong, no one wants to take that risk. So we really need to arm our regulators, ASIC and APRA and others, with the right people, but more importantly, just as importantly, the right tools.
Well, and I'd argue though that jail sentences is the important part, because to me, like a lot these guys that are like, oh yeah, okay, we skirted whatever rules. Okay, so there's a $1.3 billion fine. That's not coming out of my salary. That's coming out of shareholders. Okay, I made my money. Maybe I have to claw back, 2% of it. And I'm off sailing into the sunset. So whereas if there's a jail term for them, all of a sudden it's real. But that doesn't seem to be on the cards. Yeah.
It has to be orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. That is the only thing that will work. And I got that with quite a few people I spoke to in the book that have been on the really gnarly end of this, that are putting their lives on the line, right? So your Bill Micah's going undercover where he's got a bounty on his head because of the work that he does. So those people are doing that kind of work. I spoke to plenty of people in like Pakistan and Jordan who have armed security guards outside their homes provided by the bank, because when they report on the funding of terrorism, they're at massive risk and there's credible threats, right? So you've got all these people on the side of what we call good, on the side of society, taking these huge risks, and they are livid that when it all goes wrong, they look at it and go, hang on a minute, we're taking all of these risks for the common good. And then you've got these corporations and executives who have really been facilitating the second arm of the drug trade or the criminal underworld, which is moving the proceeds of crime, washing it, cleaning it. If someone drove the getaway car, they'd be criminally charged, wouldn't they? But what if you're driving the getaway car for the money? And that is a question that as a society, I think we need to think more deeply about.
Well, I know right now the answer is, well, take Westpac. What crime could I fine you as a person $1.3 billion, but not judge that it was worth you going to jail? It's like not one. That's the thing for me is like, how can you turn around and say, here is a company that's done something so bad that we think it's worth more money than anyone will see in their lifetime. Most people will see in their lifetime, but not one person gets fined or goes to jail for it. It's like,
yeah. And what happened there as well was a pretty interesting one, because they had Austrax. People kind of can get confused saying, Austrax hunting down money laundering. Actually, the criminal side of it is the AFP. So they are working together as a seamless unit but they are just an intelligence gathering agency. And so their role on the regulatory side is pretty straightforward. It's, did you report or did you not? Did you have the right systems and controls in place? So they're kind of going at organizations not for the act of laundering money, but for the failures that allowed it to happen.
Yep.
So that's a pretty distinct difference. And so then what you had with these cases was ASIC then picked it up and went, okay, let's have a look at this in terms of directors' duties, because that would be a way of getting at the individuals. So Austrac can't get at them unless, like I was saying, tipping off or something where you're actually, doing that. Austrac can't get at individuals. So ASIC, this was a coordinated approach. ASIC then went, okay, we're going to do the director's duties case. It was a bit of a landmark case, but both of them fell over and didn't lead to anything. And I believe that was because the laws were just not quite drafted well enough. So, Damien, there was that funny thing with the law where they gave them $17, $18, $21 million per offence in the legislation. Politicians had no idea that you could commit 53 million offences, right?
Yeah.
And have I did the numbers, and I think the potential penalty in the Westpac case was like 200 times Australia's GDP.
Yeah.
So you clearly had a bit of a drafting mismatch there. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what scares me now is they go, okay, let's go back and neuter that. Let's go back and bring that back to, let's make it $10,000 a thing. And then all of a sudden,
you're back to another captured regulator at that point. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, look, thanks a lot for coming on. Sam, have you got some things you want to up with?
Now we'll have the viewer question of the week. So this is for the viewers to have some discussion in the comment section over the coming days. And the question for this week is, will the Tranche 2 reforms be implemented before the next election? So feel free to post your thoughts and engage with us and some of the other viewers over the coming days. And just before we wrap up, Nathan, I'd like to just give you a bit of an opportunity to talk about your book. I understand it's just come out. Is that right?
Yeah, it came out yesterday. Yep. So it's on shelves now. If you want to, look at that. Leith's got his copy. No, it's out there on the shelves, and it's also in audiobook format. So I've suffered the hardship of reading it, so you don't have to if you're into audiobooks.
Excellent. We'll put some links in the show notes after the thing to where people can find it on Amazon and. Yeah.
Thanks so much, guys. And I'll tell you what, you're my favorite economist. I love what you all do, and I think it's actually a national treasure. And I've been an avid reader and lurker on the forums for many years, and I get great story ideas as well from reading the thoughts of your crew. And you've just been right on so many counts. And look, here we are running through the gas crisis, and it's like, told you so.
Yes, a good segue. We're actually doing a bit of a special this afternoon. So given our national energy markets failed, we're going to be back on at 4 this afternoon to look at the gas market. So yeah, another podcast coming through this afternoon. But yeah, excellent segue. Thank you for that.
I'll be listening.
Yeah.
Excellent. So that almost wraps us up. So yeah, Nathan, once again, thanks for coming on the show, and all the best with the book.
Thanks so much, Sam. Really appreciate it. And Leith, keep up the great work, mate. Love your material.
Damo, thanks for coming on the show again, and yeah, we look forward to this afternoon for the energy market podcast.
Excellent. Thanks, Sam.
Take care, gents. Cheers.
Don't forget to like the video now. And finally, if you know of anyone who might get some value out of today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you can please share it with them. And also, if you'd like to see some more of our previous content or episodes, head over to nucleuswealth.com/content. And to stay up to date with us, with news from us, you can also follow us on all major social media. So for myself, Damien, Leith, Nathan, and the rest of the team at Nucleus Wealth, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.